This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me ad hoc like this. I've done my presentation update over lunch, so my sandwiches are displayed over there. And I noticed that I'm fluctuating from British to American version of spelling of the word artifact. So I use artifact or artifact depending on. And then I had Jose van Dyck surname spelled wrongly. Otherwise, I think we are going to be fine. Okay. So my story starts with my own political awakening, and I'm going to give you the clip that comes out of the event that I'm going to talk about today. It is a Chinese version, which is interesting, we can talk about it, of the actual documentary story reel that was screened at the BBC in 2007.
In 1996, our history was 3 wars, international isolation, sanctions of United Nations, no gas, no electricity, no money, no hope. That was Serbia in 1996, and people simply had enough. The whole movement was like a love parade. So bright, so different from the despair of the streets, so different from all this misery and the grayness of Belgrade.
If you are not mad, you've gone mad. You have to be positively mad around here to survive.
Okay, so that was pretty much my condition at the time. And it was quite important because I started as a journalist in culture, in radio, in culture department in radio, and then I moved on to write for the Daily Telegraph, Belgrade's Daily Telegraph. And eventually ended up working at a television station, directing the news. And I didn't really, until I survived the demonstrations, the protest in Belgrade, actually knew anything about politics. And this kind of space of carnival that Bhakti writes about really mobilized all of us, all the society, into some kind of a political awakening and eventually action. I was living between the city and the suburbs, so I walked from those suburbs into the city center in order to take part in the protest, like all of my family. And it was really interesting when once I got an encounter with academic texts that I read about the Baudelaire's depictions in Benjamin's understandings of flaneur in Paris, and I thought of, maybe we all were at that time, these flaneurs of Belgrade. I also finished film academy at the time, and in this kind of an elitist formal education, I didn't really have an impression that there is a contribution that artists can make to politics apart from whatever is already prescribed. So I was looking at these artists leading the public expression in the streets, and that was a new kind of form that was emerging at the time for me. And what was happening is that artists would come on the street with a particular, let's say, graphic design, and then that would be the day after responded to by the amateur artists that came from simple audience protesters. And these works were often even better. So I collected artifacts as these public objects, and most of them were firstly vouchers that I'm going to show, but these are the first graphic design solutions. Those are both now Saatchi graphic designers. And the sign says "I love you too," and it comes from the counter meeting. So every day we were gathering as a protest against Milosevic at the time, and then one day he organized a counter meeting where he mobilized his own political party. And once they showed up, there was a clash between people who were already on the streets, and he became really nervous, so much so that in the public speech somebody shouted at him, "I love you," and he said, "I love you too." I mean, imagine David Cameron saying this. So obviously he was in the situation of distress, and then we took that as an opportunity to actually make artwork. So this "I love you too" started circulating in various posters. I created the first blog a few years ago, and I cannot show you the parts of it today because WordPress is down. It wasn't my fault, I concluded during the lunch break. So I separated all the artifacts in some kind of objects that are depicting art or media or protests. They're addressing different things. And I really didn't like it. Once the blog showed up, and everyone had a blog at the time when this opened, I just realized that what I'm doing is precisely what I don't want to do, to actually make this protest into different containers and describing it as the connected taxonomy in a way. These are some of the things that you could pick up during the walks, which is the license to walk in the first place. And these are the vouchers that are made by the creative group called SCART, which means disused or reuse. And they were providing vouchers to the nation that lost all of these things in the Milosevic room. So, for example, you would get a voucher for orgasm, and then you would think where to go to get one, because in the 10 years of his room you didn't. So it was terribly clever. All of this was very exciting, but I did not find a way of actually somehow making that archive relevant for what my experience was. A further complication came out of the fact that I was doing it at Goldsmiths University, and I found out by encountering this library at Goldsmiths that what we have there is overwhelming war narratives that are completely coloring the knowledge of the Balkans. You know, sometimes when you look through that shelf that is for the Balkan studies, you would wonder, do these people have culture at all? And West European discourses were misrepresenting the event scale, because all that was happening, for example, in Bosnia was often equalized and balanced out, or however you want to call it. It worked in opposition to the Holocaust. Now, every loss of life is surely a tragedy, but this kind of comparison to me was far too much to bear. And then in Eastern Europe I had the different difficulties, because there people would pass by this notification and acknowledgement and recording of historical events and jumping on the wagon of democratic promise. So nobody wanted to talk about this. You know, it was an attempt of revolution. Everyone else in Eastern Europe got its color attached to it. We did not succeed, so we did not even participate in it. Everyone knows only about these discourses or peace, justice and reconciliation. Nobody wanted to talk anymore about the resistance that existed throughout the Milosevic rule, and it's largely exiled. So I created this first project as a kind of a reaction to what I found myself in, and it was called Balkanizing Taxonomy, and it is an example of my struggle with these Western and Eastern academic references. So this is the project. It was funded by AHRC, and I'm going to try and enter the website. This is where you can actually find it, because it's better that you look through it, because I'm not sure if I'm going to have time for everything that I want to say. So we gathered a lot of especially young Balkan researchers to talk about the issues that they are facing in the academia, especially if they're studying in the West. And I also organized an exhibition. Exhibition came out of the collection of Balkan artifacts that were given to the Goldsmiths Center for Textiles. and they were donated by the woman called Jane Page. And it was really interesting that once I was given these artifacts, I found an Indian shirt in them, for example. So I was just thinking, okay, now we have another interpretation of what the Balkans actually is for whoever it is that is participating in this kind of dominant structures or representations now. So what I've done is made some of the garments visible, but only partially. So it would be like this. Exhibition was held in the Center for Textiles, but also in the Richard Hogarth building. And the audience would approach, but then would not be able to actually fully see the garments. And that was a tactic that I used, you can call it curatorial practice, that I've also done with the photographs. And I put photographs in the jars and then placed a black velvet on top of it. The reason for it is that in the reading I often found Balkans depicted either as domestic or as violent. So it didn't make sense to me. I found the person who's writing about this is schizophrenic himself or herself, because it cannot be one and another at the same time. Another reason why I put them in the jars was the fact that the jars are glass objects. Hence, it's the lens through the lens, through the lens, through the lens, and this is what I wanted to say, that Balkans is looked at as this kind of phenomena that exists behind all of these lenses, and maybe we are unable to truly find out what it actually is. And lastly, the last kind of visual play that I made with the garments was done by creating velvet boxes within which some of them were made. And then I put the light inside, and then I navigated the gaze of the audience through that little hole that I created in the box. So I would in a way say this is what Balkans is. So I was dictating in some kind of way what it is that you can see or not. So that was my response, a reaction to what I found at the time at Goldsmiths. So here there is a concept of the exhibition that is also depicting the impulse of taxonomizing, and I found this indexicizing, classification, very much a Western practice. And while the Balkan objects played the role of the other in my exhibition, and curator interpreted the objects as violated precisely by this navigation. And you can read more about the objects at the exhibition, so I'm just going to that one now so I can come back to the protest. But what happened is that connecting protest and this practice that I found in the West of kind of classification of the artifacts made my thesis topic crystallized in a way, and I realized that my project is the archive. I'm actually building it itself. And even though it is a site of these artifacts, it is also a record of that protest because it doesn't exist anywhere else. It will also serve to remediate possibly an account of the recent history in Serbia and establish maybe an online package for capturing the past histories. And lastly, it was a political project because I wanted that Serbia is presented by something else, not only war criminals. And this was a hard copy, the first map that I made. I just cut out all the photographs and newspaper articles, and I just made them in a little map that was carved via two rivers that are in Belgrade, Danube and Sava, and I placed all the pictures in the spaces where things were happening. And these are pretty much theoretical pillars of the whole of my thesis. So I went through various discourses, but considering that you are people from the field, I'm just going to ignore this because I think that you won't have much of the artistic practice present today, so I'm just going to let you deal with theory on your own, and I'm just going to continue doing the artistic practice bit. So I used mixed methods, interviews, workshops, and different case studies to actually explain how the protest can be narrated, navigated, depicted, and archived at the end. And the first project that I've done in Belgrade was in the Museum of History of Yugoslavia, and I was their first resident artist, and I worked with a company called the Performance Club Fiskulturniks. And that site of the museum is also Tito's mausoleum. He's actually really buried there. And Milosevic just barged in at some point, and it became his residency. And this Tito's posthumous presence actually not only colors the location and the psyche of the performance participants, but the museum workers, the audience, and this site is terribly exciting, and I would like to talk more about it. I need to come back to the protest, which is the topic of today, but do ask me if you have more questions, because it's a very rich project, so I'm sure that you'll be very interested. This is the Museum of History of Yugoslavia. It's a huge site. It's surrounded by the place called Hyde Park, funnily enough, and there is only one bus stop in front of it, so if you get off the bus there is nowhere else that you're going apart from there, so nobody gets off the bus because it's really embarrassing to be associated with this, but it's the whole interesting story that I'm going to skip now, because I want to talk to you about the methodology of approach to the memory studies or to the protest that I've done. So this is something that I want to show you from the actual performance that we've done. This is the Yugo Yoga that we played with as performers that are mobilizing the community around the museum.
The tasks ahead, comrades, are complex and vast. The challenges we face are real, they're serious, and they're many. But let me tell you this, only united together, we are strong enough to face them. Happiness is a hard and complicated question. Today, we face so many different viewpoints, so many different opinions. But one thing is clear, the happiness of one man or woman cannot be divided from the happiness of the collective.
Okay, now what we were doing here is actually playing precisely with what existed as the kind of mass exercise, ideological, educational even, a phenomena at the time that before Milosevic, that Tito's rule. And we were mobilizing people in the same way that they used to be mobilized in socialist times. So we were kind of eradicating the history of the 90s, and we were trying to connect people to some kind of a community spirit, however ideologized it was at the time, and make sure that the museum gets a visibility and some kind of welcoming discourse, because it was lacking it. My interest was to get into the archive of the museum and kind of brush the dust from the objects and make sure that they relive again. So this is what we've done at, this is a premiere in front of the Museum of History of Yugoslavia. People arrived and they started bringing us the objects. They were doing that already throughout the workshop, even we did not ask. So these were the things that started being generated, and again another archive has been created. And then a third project that I've done in Belgrade, again searching for the methodology of how am I going to make this archive of the protest, was called the Days of Remembrance, and then it grew into a BG log, which is a Belgrade log. So while I was researching, interviewing for my PhD, one of the archivists of the Center for Cultural Decontamination, a big NGO in Belgrade, told me that Vračarci, which are the people from Belgrade's borough that I lived in as a child, are guilty for the poor state that Serbia is now. So I was really interested in finding out who these people are. And this is the borough of Vračar, marked here, and I lived in this street. So I lived right on the corner, so I'm potentially guilty for everything that happened in Serbia. So I worked with the organization that is based in NGO, that is based in Bračar. It was an NGO that was 7 years old. It dealt with cultural memory and engaged me as an artist to map the actual borough with some social and physical change that was happening there. And the aim of the project was to increase visibility of the citizens' memory in public and the attempt to keep the memory of these family houses and important buildings and yards and street spaces that were specific for Bračar. I had plenty of research questions that I wanted to connect to my PhD, but I also wanted to produce a separate artwork. And I constantly have been interested in how are these private histories and memories made present in public, how they were utilized by the governments as they are changing and so on. And this is one of the visual pillars, which is something that I found in the elevator in the building that I grew up. It's actually the house order, something that existed in the times of socialism, when Tito was present in the country, and I found it terribly interesting. It's actually teaching people how to behave in the city, how to use the elevator, how the building's supposed to operate, and what you're supposed to do with your neighbors. So I thought, well, if we need to bring that back, that kind of guideline on how to live in the city, then the city has changed. And this lack of solidarity in the public space was illustrated by the doormat that was chained to the stairs to prevent theft. And I want to show it to you. This is how I entered into the building and found this. So to me, it was really impossible that something like this is happening after everything that we went through. And this division between rural and urban Serbia is vast and has always been substantial. I'm saying this because there was a lot of people that arrived to the cities, hence changed it. And they had difficulties to adapt, and people had difficulties to accept them as well. And this relationship has been complicated during and after the war. It's the question of refugees that actually still bothers Belgrade, who these people are we going to give them papers, are they ours or they're theirs? All these questions are still quite active in Belgrade. So I ran oral history and mapping workshops with young people and elderly in Belgrade. I positioned the map of Vračar in front of them and I made an open question, what is Vračar for you? And they started mapping their own histories within that particular map. It was an intergenerational project because I held journalism workshops with local high schools, and they brought a lot of members into the project. We gathered in the local pensioners club, and that was a cafe and the social center as well, and a lot of pensioners were really kind of high profilers, people that actually held quite important jobs that I did not realize until we went halfway through the workshop. Whilst the map noted the links between the past and the present, oral histories provided mostly by elderly revealed in the workshop run a plethora of issues that was arising from Yugoslav state governance. And some of those issues you can see on the map, and I want to show you here. So this is how the map looks like, and then you can click on any of the dots and you'll get some information about what was happening there. So in this particular instance, there is a story of the actual pensioner center and the workshop itself. And then some of other stories can be, if you click on any of those, you can find. Some of them have images depending on what kind of information we got from the people. But this was interesting because some of those stories had this kind of information that one of the pensioners had 9 properties in the area, and that was kind of quite scary. I mean, who has 9 properties in any area in the city? And that kind of made me understand that there was a class system even in socialism times. It's just that we haven't been taught that was the case. And these people who knew that they were upper classes, even in the time of socialism, mostly spoke about euros and square meters when they were talking about whatever properties they had. They had international relationships, and they traveled, even in Aspen and these kind of places. They had high standard, kudos and ideology. They were very sporty, so this idea of healthy spirit in the healthy body that we explored in Yugo Yoga really was present. And they really loved music, and the music was always depicting some kind of happiness, completely ignoring the wars. But in this kind of environment, I also realized, even though that they were, and this is just an example of them dotting and rooting, I realized that they were actually potentially really responsible for what was happening in Serbia in the 90s, because some of them would, for example, stand up in the middle of the interview and say, sorry love, I have to go, and then once they come back, they said they have to sort out something in relation to their properties with somebody who happened to be Tito's nephew. So these were really, really high kind of profilers, really big players in Belgrade. And that kind of old connection still was very much alive, and things are still sorted in the same way. I was asked also, you know, is anyone bothering you? And if it does, there's a mobile phone of the mayor you can call him if there's any problems. So this is the kind of experience that I started. So these kind of lovely old people started turning into kind of quite scary characters. And these are the things that they have, some of the objects that they gave me in the workshops, and then we created an exhibition from them, and some of the digital platforms are online, so you can still see them, like this one here. So this is another map that has been created, and it's for the Begelog, because Vračar project was so successful that we then got an opportunity to do the project across the whole of the Belgrade. But I kept wondering, is this nostalgia for Yugoslavia or for socialism? And this was also very interesting. It was a football article, some massive football coach was present, you know, was kind of globe-trotting at the time, and we got this from his wife. So yeah, I was just wondering about, you know, what is at play, or all of those things are at play at the same time, all these kinds of discourses that we are talking about here separately. I find in Belgrade being at one. I'm going to skip this, so yes. So I found that archives and maps are a mess, and if they do make sense, I wonder whose sense it is. And these overwhelming war narratives saturate any other discourse or issue, even the whole culture that is existing in Balkans outside of this peace, justice and reconciliation paradigm. And in that dominant, homogenized, constructed storytelling, I found across the West that does rub off to the East too. Belgrade epitomizes violence, dictatorship and war. And I find participatory arts that I work at terribly important in depicting these kind of stories, because the mediation of them actually points in the direction that then can be taken over either by politicians or sociologists. But the extraction actually is very hard to happen without this, I would say, a free flow that arts can bring to it. I find participatory arts, for me now, political arts discipline. And I don't think it is a community arts, I think it's a collaboration between artists and the citizens. And I learned about this at the protest in Belgrade, and I continue working in the same way. I also think that if there isn't a stake, there isn't participation. It is not their journey, but yours as an artist. If you learn nothing, the work didn't matter. If you lie to them or to yourself, and you or they will never come back. And there are not repetitions, because relationships are always in flux. So you interview once, and that's the only time you had a person being who they were at the time, and who you were at the time. I also wanted to say that All three projects have done a lot for me. The first one, Balkanizing Taxonomy, created colleagues. So I gathered especially young academics who are working on the topics of the Balkans that are going through the same kind of resistance that I am. It created a family. Yugo Yoga, for example, had a couple of ladies there that ended up being part of my family through marriage. And it recreated a community, the elderly, in days of remembrance, kind of reminding me of the intergenerational participation that we had in the protest, and we were not that community since the protest itself. And I'm just going to finish with the last map that is currently in the making. So it's the one that I hope is going to be different than the blog itself. It has a lot of artifacts gathered in digital form. It has loads of actions that were depicting throughout the protest. But in terms of this journey that I've gone through, I just want to read this. Just like going into memory journey, if I am to do the justice to the people I worked with, I am to respect whatever direction they take when providing information to me. It made my research discursive, exciting, lifelong, and if you wish to claim that it lacks structure, rigor and standard, ask yourself, is it easy to live in a mess? Do you think anyone likes it? How do you feel when you book a meeting and it does not happen, or you ask a question and the interviewee is talking relentlessly about something you do not want to know? When all of this is happening for years, wouldn't you say that there is something in it for you? If you are observant, reflexive, intuitive researcher, wouldn't you recognize that the issues presented in front of you are not as simple as your academic endeavor, but encompass avoidances, misrepresentations, changes of political and private spheres and disruptions that are not containable, speakable, solvable? If you cut out, neglect and narrow down those incomprehensible nuances to infrastructures of knowledge, your rigor let you down. Just like the curator who is trying to tame the other by capturing him, her in objects, our projects are displays of excitement with topics that must not feel done. Digital technology allows us to show that, rather than provide another opportunity to turn over the data, a compressed, small and tedious pieces of information that hurts the people they're supposed to represent. And this is thank you.